The host side, as you said, it's kind of like a side hustle. Like running a podcast is a business in and of itself. But I do think that it opens more doors than being a guest. And what I mean by that is you had me here today. When we're done recording, I'm here, right? I'm not saying you wouldn't have access to me otherwise. You and I are actually friends outside of this, so like that's different. But for most people that I get on their show, that's our only interaction we've ever had. Well, now if they would have asked me for a phone call, I would have said no. And I'm not trying to be rude. I just can't take every phone call. But now they've got me here, and they've helped me by letting me be on the platform. From building connections, from marketing, like that's powerful. Now they have that opportunity, and vice versa. When I have someone on my show, I've got that access to them now. So I think from an indirect business standpoint, it works from that, but also authority building. When you have a podcast, like still to this day, like unfortunately my podcast is about podcasting. So in like the real world, it doesn't mean anything to anyone. But like when I mention my podcast, people are like, "Ooh, what's your podcast about?" And I'm like, "Podcasting," and they're like, "Ooh, weirdo," right? Like walk away. But for most of us,
but there are 3 million podcasters in the world that,
yes,
that
you are
would
right.
appreciate your show.
I don't run into them all the time, right?
I'm Kandas Rodarte. This is Gratitude Geek. And today I'm talking to my friend and somebody that I very much admire, Alex Sanfilippo. We are going to chat about the business of podcasting. But first, let's hear a little bit about PodMatch. Are you a podcaster looking for top-notch guests or an expert eager to share your story? PodMatch takes the hassle out of finding the perfect match. It's like a dating app, but for podcasters. I've connected with amazing guests for Gratitude Geek through PodMatch, and you can too. Use my link in the show notes and start making meaningful podcast connections. And you know, we are all about building connections here on this show. So welcome, Alex. I am super excited to talk to you about the business of podcasting.
Candace, thank you so much for having me. And by the way, you've done my job for me already. Like I'm just here to hang out now. And by the way, as a listener of your podcast, I want to say thank you so much for what you do. I think if there was more gratitude in the world, from a little bit from each of us, the world would be completely different in just one day. And I thank you for doing your part to make that happen. And again, as a listener, I just absolutely respect and love what you do. So it's an honor to be here today.
Oh, just made my heart go a little pitter patter. Thank you. So I admire you as well because you have taken podcasting to the next level with your work, both in PodMatch and with your podcast, which is Podcasting Made Simple. So tell the audience, now that I've given you, a little, this is what he does, tell the audience what you'd like them to know about you.
Yeah, first and foremost, I really consider myself a podcaster and then the founder of podmatch.com. Those are kind of what I do professionally. Beyond that, I like to think that my work is just an extension of my life. So I try to show up the same way as a person and as I do in work. And for me, I'm a husband. I'm a friend to a lot of people. I just recently found out I'm a godfather to now 10 plus children. Don't have any of my own. But I absolutely just love being active in people's lives. I love showing up and just serving people whenever I can. And it kind of all stems from my faith. I'm a follower of Jesus, and I don't push that on anybody. But for me, when I look at that, it's to love and to serve people is what I take away from the life of that individual. And so for me, I just do my best to show up that way in life and in work. I've definitely blurred those lines a little bit, but that's it. I just have a life that I thoroughly enjoy, and it's all rooted in that idea of loving and serving others.
I love that. Okay, so as a person with Catholic upbringing, the idea of you not knowing that you were the godfather to 10 children is a little confusing to me because there's a whole ceremony involved.
Okay, listen, there should be. I've done 2 of those, and then I recently found out other friends that have multiple kids, they just in passing were like, "Oh yeah, you just need to sign one document, but you're kind of who we picked." I'm like, I'm honored. I'm like, should we not have talked about this, right?
Oh, that's funny. So it's not really a godfather. It's if something should happen to us, you're who we would like to take care of our children. Or
Yes, and I think that a lot of people don't understand. I think the movie The Godfather makes everyone want to call an Italian guy the Godfather. So I don't know. But nonetheless, I'll just say it's an honor to have friends in my life that trust at that level, right? And I'm extremely grateful for that personally.
Yeah, and that says something about you and your wife, actually, Alicia, about the character that you have presented. Well, a lot about your character and about just your ability to garner friends and trust.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
that's pretty cool.
I agree with that. And my wife, Alicia, business partner as well, for anyone listening today who's like, "Oh, who's this Alicia person?" She's a brilliant business mind, also a great wife, and a really fun friend. I'm very thankful and honored to be married to her.
Did you start the business together?
We did, yeah. It's funny, I didn't mean to. I just kind of had the idea, and we kind of started going with it. And she's like, "You need help." And she had just actually sold a business a few months before that. So she's like, you need help. I'm like, do I? And she's like, yeah. And she's like, let me show you what to do here. And then she just kind of jumped in. I was like, okay, now you just tell me what to do. This is going to work really great.
So, having been a business partner with my husband for 27 years now, this is what I know that's important if you want to work with your spouse. You need to fill each other's gaps and not overlay each other's positives, your strengths. So if you've got strengths and she has strengths and they're exactly the same strengths, it's not going to work. But if you can fill each other's gaps, that is a beautiful business partnership. Other than that, you're going to be fighting all the time, and that's not good for your marriage.
That is the wisdom everyone needed today. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Appreciate y'all. I'm just kidding. No, but for real, that is the key. You've figured it out, and thank you. I wish I would have known that from day one, but here we are.
It's only been 27 years. If I haven't figured that out after 27 years, I don't know.
Right?
It's really tough, though. You live together. You have kids together. Well, we had a kid together. We had this business together. We were in the car together on the way to the shop. We were in the car together on the way home. There's only so much of each other that you can take unless you can figure out how to fill the gaps.
Right. Well, great job making that happen. Keep it up.
Oh, thank you. And we managed not to kill each other, and we raised a pretty darn good kid, right?
Congratulations again.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk to you about the business of podcasting because when I started 11 years ago, it was nothing at all like what it is now. Podcasting was a way to consume some audio content on your iPod or if you were smart enough on your computer. Now it's on your phone, and it was just a way for people like me who had a message that they wanted to share with the world to share their message. But now it's a business. I mean, it's really evolved. So talk about that.
Listen, first off, thank you for paving the way in podcasting. I'm at year 10 at time of recording this, so you're 1 year ahead of me. And like you said, it was just a way, it was for me to put my thoughts into the world. And I didn't have to write them that way, right? And I did like to write, but I was like, man, this is becoming a lot. Let me just talk into this. I talked into my phone and I posted that, and that was my podcast. And you're right, it has completely changed. Let me fast forward half that time. Let's go back now to 2019. I started doing an interview-based podcast, and people still thought this is just a way for Alex to get his thoughts out, and now he wants to waste other people's time and get their thoughts out as well. Kandas, I don't know how long you've been doing interviews exactly, but back in 2019, convincing anybody that being on a podcast was valuable was like pulling teeth. People were like, please stop, leave me alone. Like, it's not valuable. I'll do it for you, but you're welcome type of thing, right? And that was kind of the mentality of it. Now, present day, people are begging to be on podcasts. Absolutely, like to be a guest. They are like, I will do anything to be on your podcast. Tell me what you need from me. I'll do it right now. I can show up in the middle of the night if you need me to. And I'm talking about the podcast guesting side because it shows what's actually happening on the side of being a host. It has changed from sharing your thoughts to sharing in a way that other people can apply to now people, like you said, it's truly become a business and people are seeing the power and the authority that it brings. In my mind, what it's most similar to is being on a stage, podcast host, podcast guest are on a stage. The listeners are people sitting in seats. That's how valuable it is. And that's how people actually view the hosts that are listening. So listeners are saying, wow, whatever this person is saying, I am trusting them with my ears. I want to change my life based off what they're saying. Now, even if you have a comedy podcast, you're still providing laughter to someone who might not otherwise get it. I'll tell you what, as a software founder, at the end of the day, the shows I like to listen to, there better be some humor in it. I need to laugh, right? I've always got an intense day that I really love, but at the end of it, I'm not like looking to drive even more intensity into my day. I want some lightheartedness, right? So the change for someone like me is just a little bit of laughter. That is still a business. It's the business of laughter, right? And so for all of us, there really is a business behind it and a brand behind it that I think is very quickly becoming the primary form of media that people like to consume and the highest authority building as well.
Well, and if you can't enjoy what you're listening to while you're listening to it,
right?
It's like the people who doom scroll. How is that giving you any pleasure?
I've never figured that one out. I have no answer there.
There's no pleasure involved. Here's what I have learned in the last 11 years of podcasting. And honestly, I did take a break to have cancer. So there was a little break in between there.
I'm sorry, Kandas. The way you said that just totally caught me off guard. It's like a one-on-one. Don't laugh into the mic when someone's talking, but I just didn't expect you to say it like that.
I mean, if you're a frequent listener, you know my story.
Yes.
When I came back to podcasting after my 5-year break, what I discovered was that everything I had set up was still fluid, and working perfectly. And people were still listening to my episodes from 5 years before. So that told me that how extremely valuable podcasting was. And the problem I had, because I've always had an interview show, and when I started, my first iteration of the show was actually I would sit in a coffee shop and some people would come visit me in the coffee shop, and we would record our conversation in the coffee shop, and we called it Coffee and Conversations, right? And then that evolved into the podcast. So the first iteration of the show was a video talk show. But after I went, it was really easy when we were still doing coffee interviews, coffee shop interviews. Just come meet me at the coffee shop one-on-one. But after I relaunched, it was during the pandemic, like March of 2020. I said, the thing, now that we're going to be stuck at home, the thing that I miss more than anything is that podcast. So let me just restart the podcast. And it was easy to find the guests at the beginning because I still had a lot of people in my network that, even though I had moved to a different state, I still had a lot of people in my network that I could talk to about gratitude in business, right? Which is the theme of the show, building genuine connections with community, building genuine lasting connections with clients, colleagues, and community. That's the whole theme of this show. And so I could still talk to people, but then I ran out of people to talk to. And then I found PodMatch. And now I literally get about 6 times the number of pitches than I can interview per year. So I have to do a lot of filtering and sorting to find the right guests, the right conversations that I want to have. And one of the things that a lot of guests get wrong, and I want you to talk about this, is that they think that coming onto a show is about advertising what they do. When you come on someone else's show, you're there to add value to the audience. It's not an infomercial, it's a conversation.
It really is. And it goes back to a previous point that you made, that podcasting is now a business. And it is the business of serving people, though. It's the business of adding value to people that are listening. And a lot of people that are jumping into the podcast guesting space don't realize that. They just say business, opportunity, it's my infomercial, right? Like that's what I get to do here. And I think that there's 2 issues with that. Number one, it's not your platform. And so you're showing up somewhere that's not yours. And I don't think anyone necessarily means to do this, or most people don't, but a lot of guests kind of show up in a very disrespectful way. I got a new book coming out. I got to get on your podcast. It's like, well, sure. We'll get the red carpet out for you. Hold on a minute, right? And I don't think they necessarily mean it that way. They just don't realize that there is work that goes into being a host of a podcast. A lot of work. And the other thing they don't realize is just that there's people listening that are not listening for the sake of being sold. They're listening for the sake of furthering their lives. They're listening for transformation. They want to not be where they are before they start an episode by the time they end it. You basically trying to sell your book and hinting at some of the value that's in it is not why people are showing up. And so, because it is, I would call it a podcast is a business. If you run it like a business, it's going to do really well. Even if it's a hobby, you still want to put the guardrails around it, the standard operating procedures, the documentation, treating it like a business so they can remain a hobby. But guests, once again, they see business opportunity, right? And I do think that that's actually a problem in podcasting at large. And I'm very active right now in the space of trying to educate guests to understand, hey, this is a place for you to further understand how to share your message. It's a place for you to just in an unfiltered way, share all the value that you possibly can. Leave it all on the table. And I do wish that more people would get that. And for me, I try to show up that way. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I can't think of a podcast episode I've ever shown up to sell something. I just show up to say, hey, can I possibly leave it all here so they don't ever need to even hear from me again because I left everything I know on the table? That to me would be a bigger win as a guest.
Well, that's what you do in your business. Everything that you do is about helping other people. PodMatch is about helping hosts and guests meet each other so they can create great content. Your podcast, Podcasting Made Simple, is about being a better podcaster. I mean, and you cover a lot of really unique ideas. And the other thing that you do on your show that is a brilliant business model is that you have guest hosts. So you use your platform to elevate other people, but the message is always for podcasters and podcast guests. Tell me about your collaborations.
Yeah, that was an interesting decision, Kandas. I'm glad you mentioned this. So for me, again, my podcast is how I first and foremost identify, right? In business as a podcaster, more than a software guy, more than the founder of PodMatch. I really am a podcaster first and foremost. And it took a little bit of ego checking, humility to be able to do my podcast in the format that it's in now. It used to just be a straight up interview show, which I really love. And I still get to do a couple interviews every quarter, which I'm very thankful for. But the more I talk to podcast hosts and guests that are the listeners, I ask, what do you love about the show? What can we do better for future listeners? Like I'm asking these things. I'm getting on calls with them. I kept on hearing, man, I really don't have time. Like I love the format. I just don't have time. I'm busy with my own podcast. I'm busy with my own guesting efforts. And so I kept on making it shorter and shorter to the point where I was like, I'm basically prompting people just to talk. Kandas, now tell them this. Okay, Kandas, now tell them that. I'm like, why am I here, right? Like, and it kind of got to that point where I was like, it'd be better if we went more the TEDx format. And so the decision was made that like I won't be on most episodes. It's just going to be, as you said, that guest host to come in and share what they know that I don't. And instead of me prompting them on like the things to talk, I'm just like, hey, can you just talk about this and show up and just leave it all on the table in less than 15 minutes? And it's gone over so well with our audience. It is the educational wing of what we do with PodMatch. And again, for me, it was like I had to check my ego at the door. I had to step into further humility to say, okay, it's not the Alex show. It is really podcasting made simple for guests and hosts. And that means I'm typically not the expert that can share in the best possible way. The whole idea behind it was just, could we use this to really serve people in the way that they want to be served? And here's the thing. I do not suggest this format to most people. People are always like, ooh, should I do my podcast like that? I'm like, absolutely not. Unless your audience has straight up told you that's what they want, most people actually don't like this format. The people that do are the host and the guest saying, I need to learn about X. Where can I learn about X? We can just send it to them. Here it is.
You are creating your podcast for your ideal audience.
Right,
You're not creating
exactly.
your podcast for people who wouldn't be interested in what it takes to be a podcast host or guest.
Correct.
Yeah. That's who your audience is. So you're creating what your audience wants, which is, we're talking about the business of podcasting.
Here we are.
That
Right?
is, okay, that's what we need to do.
And such a good point, real quick, Candace, if I could just, I don't mean to interject, but I thought this was interesting. You mentioned like doom scrollers earlier. That term could be offensive to people that like to do that. But guess what? They're not the people listening to Gratitude Geek. Those aren't them. There's no one going to email you being like, that really upset me when you said that. No one here is going to say that because that is not who you're serving. If you were serving them, you wouldn't call it Gratitude Geek. You'd call it like Doom and Gloom Nerd or something. I don't know, right?
That is true. That is true. So I had this idea. I'm going to run it by you. I noticed that the podcasts that I listen to are conversations with people where they're talking about the same topic and they both come prepared to talk about the topic, but they don't know what the other person's going to talk about. And my daughter listens to crime podcasts. That's her thing. She likes those. She's 26 years old. I think that's the only podcast that 26-year-olds listen to is crime podcast. And it's the same thing where two people are just having a conversation about this story that they both wanted to learn about. And I was thinking, that's probably where, no, I know it is. That's where I want to take my podcast. Because I've had 200, you're 266, episode 266. So I've had 266 conversations where I ask questions and the guest answers them. But it would be so much more fun if we just picked a topic and we both brought information. And it would turn the whole interview process on its head. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that we're getting to talk about this. This is fun. First off, I thought that you're going to switch it to true crime. Like,
no!
You're saying, like, wait, what? I'm like,
no, I'm not switching to true crime.
Oh, man, thank you. See, here's the thing. The interviews I'm starting to really enjoy more and more aren't really interviews. They're conversations with two differing opinions and people not agreeing on everything. And so that's what I feel like you would get with that. If basically you emailed me 2 weeks ago, or maybe that's even too much time, right? Like give your guests 2 or 3 days, basically like show up ready to discuss this topic. If we both do that separately, I'm going to think one thing, you're going to think something else. And for me, what I'm realizing is I like being part of a conversation where two people are like, I don't really agree with that because here's what I learned. And they can respectfully disagree or grow together in real time. I mean, in my life, the best conversations I've had are when people bring a little bit of friction to me. I can remember a time in my life where somebody took me to lunch one day and he had a notepad of things that Alex needed to improve in his life. And like, listen, he had the authority to do that because he was a close friend. He was well-meaning. And he just challenged me. And I was like, man, I don't agree with that. And here's why. And he's like, well, what you're saying, I get. But like, here's what I think. And this is what it looks like from an outsider looking in type of thing. And I grew a lot from that. And since that time, that's happened a lot in my life. So for me, I think that's a really cool idea because it gives you this opportunity to have a conversation versus an interview where there might be some overlap on opinions and things like that allow you to have that little bit of friction that I think helps a listener say, you know what, I agree more with Kandas and Alex right now. And that's helping them process and grow themselves. I think that's a brilliant format, and I look forward to hearing it.
Oh, well, okay. Starting next week. Wait, can I start next week? Maybe. I might be. Maybe. I love that. And I love that you said I only need to give the guest a week. Here's what we're going to be talking about. It's not an interview. We're having a discussion about this. Bring 5 to 10 ideas that you want to discuss, and I'll bring 5 to 10 ideas that I want to discuss, and we'll discuss them.
Will you keep it around the idea of gratitude, though? You won't change like the brand?
Oh, yeah, no. It's going to be about building connection with clients, colleagues, and community.
Cool, yeah.
Through the lens of gratitude.
If you can custom tailor it to each of them, like me knowing about podcasting, be like, hey, talk about how you can incorporate more ways to connect in podcasting, right? Like to make it very specific to the guest you're going to have on, and then you kind of do your work that way. That kind of gives them like a foundation they already know and are comfortable with. That would be, again, that'd be a really cool format that I think that's the direction of where this podcasting thing is going, actually.
Yeah. Well, literally, those are the kinds of shows that people prefer to listen to.
Right.
That when Mel Robbins has a conversation, she's not interviewing somebody. She's having a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's what I have tried to do on this show, but I want to tweak it a little bit more.
Yeah, you are a great conversationalist, and I really respect that about you because there are shows that I go on as a guest. I think I've been on just over 500 different shows, and some of them, they're straight up interview. Like they've got 10 questions they're going to ask Alex, and they don't have any input, but you're a great conversationalist because we have this back-to-back, which again, for me, is what makes it more interesting.
Yeah, thank you. This is Alex. I didn't mean for you to come on my show and gush about me.
Wait, you said that every compliment was $5. No, I'm just kidding. Really, you just do a great job. I mean every word of it.
Oh, thank you. I have a controversial, unpopular opinion. I don't think that podcast hosting is the way to grow your business. I think podcast guesting is the way to grow your business. Do you have thoughts?
I do, but I want some clarification there. Do you mind expanding a little bit on that? Because I definitely have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'd like to hear a little bit more as to like what you mean by that.
To be a host, it's hours of your time. Hours of your time. And you got to hire a production crew, got to do the marketing, yada, 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 yada. And it really does become a side business. Like you've got your main business and then you've got your side business, which is this podcast. When you're a guest, you can share your message and you don't have to do any of that heavy work. Caveat, though, is that you need to make sure that as a guest, you are on the correct show. So you have to have that message audience fit. So, you're a fantastic guest for my show because I know that you're a grateful person. I know that you give great value to the world, and I know that you are all about building community. That makes you the perfect guest for the show. But if you weren't those things, if you were just, a podcast host of a podcast, I teach people how to do podcasting, you probably wouldn't be the right fit for this audience because this audience is looking for ways to build community, right? Now, do you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you. So I agree with you to the extent of as a guest from earning business and growing it, it can be a very good channel for you to just increase your marketing, right? And even just the assets. Like I don't know exactly what you'll do after this, Kandas, but like a lot of hosts, they do all kinds of things. And like, here's everything you need. I'm like, cool, I don't need to do any content creation for the next month because now I just share all this from you, right? And so there's that element of it. And I'd say it's like a faster win for sure. The host side, as you said, it's kind of like a side hustle. Like running a podcast is a business in and of itself. Mm-hmm. But I do think that it opens more doors than being a guest. And what I mean by that is you had me here today. When we're done recording, I'm here, right? I'm not saying you wouldn't have access to me otherwise. You and I are actually friends outside of this, so like that's different. But for most people that I get on their show, that's our only interaction we've ever had. Well, now if they would have asked me for a phone call, I would have said no. And I'm not trying to be rude. I just can't take every phone call. But now they've got me here, and they've helped me by letting me be on the platform. From building connections, from marketing, like that's powerful. Now they have that opportunity, and vice versa. When I have someone on my show, I've got that access to them now. So I think from an indirect business standpoint, it works from that, but also authority building. When you have a podcast, like still to this day, like unfortunately my podcast is about podcasting. So in like the real world, it doesn't mean anything to anyone. But like when I mention my podcast, people are like, "Oh, what's your podcast about?" And I'm like, podcasting, and they're like, ooh, weirdo, right? Like, walk away. But for most of
Yes,
us,
but there are 3 million podcasters in the world
yes,
that
you are
would
right.
appreciate your show.
I don't run into them all the time, right? But for some people, if you're like, hey, like for you, my show is about building connections and just living a more like a life of more thankfulness and gratitude. Almost anyone you meet is like, ooh, that sounds really cool. And now they immediately look at you as an authority, which that can help your business. So for me, the guesting side, quick win. The host side, more strategic, more lead gen, but also it builds this sense of authority in people that find out about you.
Well, I find that a lot of folks say, "Oh, I'm going to start this podcast," and then they get 3 episodes in and they're like, "Oh, this was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be." Or something I heard recently was, "We ran out of things to talk about."
Yeah. So I don't track the 1 to 3 episodes because so many people leave. But from 3 to 7, there's only, I think it's like a 45% chance of making it that far. And yes, I've
Are
heard
you
this.
kidding me?
No, it's wild. So like if you make it from 1 episode to 3, it's like 90 some odd percent of people stop. So let's just like that. We just factored that out of our data. And by the way, if anyone's like, ooh, where are you getting this? If you go to podmatch.com/report, you can see all this data. We update it every month. It doesn't want your email address or anything like that. It's just a public report page. And
I, as a podcaster, I so appreciate that you put that information out there because it is very valuable.
oh, thank you.
And I love that you do the demographics. You know, Gen Z listens to podcasts this way. It's been a very valuable resource for me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. That means a lot. So thinking about that point though of how many people stop, like that's a lot. And it's because people don't understand that, like you said, it's a business. There is work that goes into it. So people are just like, this looks fun, I'll do it. And I want to be the next famous podcaster in a week, right? And they're like, wait a minute, there's not 100 people listening. There's not even 1,000. Like, what am I doing? People quit. Or the other one, I ran out of topics. Listen, I live by this simple rule. If it's important, we repeat it. If it's important, we repeat it. There are no topics I've only covered once if it matters. I cover them until I'm blue in the face, and people are still like, "Oh, I'm finally getting it." I'm like, "Cool, I'm going to keep on repeating it to make sure you really get it."
Yeah. Let's like pay-per-click advertising is a conversation I don't ever want to have again. Because it's not about you can't build a community with pay-per-click.
No, no, I don't do any pay per click for that reason right now. Just because I really like, I just like the personal connection. You know how I am. So,
So the thing about what you do with the stats and that you update it, and I told you how much I love it. I love it because podcasting is my business. And a business person pays attention to things like demographics and statistics. I'm constantly looking at those things to see how I can tweak and be better or where my audience is. And I recently found out the hard way that I might need to pay more attention to Spotify.
oh no, me too. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. Spotify has taken over from Apple as the #1 place where people consume podcasts.
Interestingly enough, people like you and I, though, they've been doing this for a while. If we just look at our statistics page and we don't look at industry-wide stats, I don't know about you, Apple is by far my top consumption space because when my podcast came out, that was literally the only place to listen to podcasts. Maybe a few indie ones on the side, but still this day, most of my listenership comes from there. But as things shift, I'm like, wait a minute, like I'm not getting any listeners on Spotify because I'm not prioritizing it. And so again, I think for anyone, again, from a business standpoint, that's why it's important to step back and not just look at your own data, but industry data as well, because it will tell you, the trend basically tells me, hey, Alex, your podcast is not going to be listened to in about 5 to 10 years from now as the next generation really steps up because they're using a different player than you're prioritizing. You need to start prioritizing that to rank higher on it. So yeah, I'm not excited about it either, but here we are.
Well, the problem with Spotify is that it's going to add another half an hour or 45 minutes to my workflow.
Yeah.
Because you have to upload the video manually.
Right.
You have to upload your shorts. And it's like I'm doing it all on YouTube anyway. Now I have to go do it on Spotify. Why can't this be easier?
Every platform wants your attention, right? Whether you're a consumer or you're someone that's feeding the machine, they still want your attention.
Well, since you're the stats dude, what are your thoughts on podcasts on YouTube?
Yeah, so recently, you mentioned this actually, a kind of, but there was that Gen Z poll that just went out, and it wasn't with a whole lot of people, so like we have to take it with a grain of salt, just like any report that comes out. It was a credible source that did it, and they talked about how Gen Z is very interested in audio more than they are in video. Even if they are on a video platform consuming it, they typically will minimize it and can keep on going with their day or whatever else they're doing. And so that was interesting data. I do think that YouTube is important from the perspective of discoverability. If, like you, we're doing a good job with our titles and descriptions. Listen, if this episode was going to be titled "A Conversation with Alex Sanfilippo," YouTube isn't really going to help you, right? If it talks about the business of podcasting, now YouTube can say, I can do something with that, right? And sure, it's scraping at itself, but I think the real benefit of YouTube right now is just their search algorithm. They're part of Alphabet's organization, so they're right there with Google. It's just so intelligent. Like it does a really good job of putting what you want in front of you. And I do think that the player apps like Apple, Spotify, Amazon, they're catching up. But I mean, YouTube's light years away. If I can't find a podcast in those apps and I go to YouTube, I can almost find it at the flip of a switch.
YouTube is a lot smarter than the other apps. And I've noticed that it is outperforming Instagram in terms of the algorithm for my personal tastes. Like if I go to Instagram to watch Reels, I'm getting stuff I'm really not interested in. But if I go to YouTube, I could scroll for hours.
That's a dangerous game, but I my wife agrees with you. So I don't have any social media myself, but she doesn't go on Instagram at all anymore. She goes to YouTube Shorts because she's like, pretty much every one of them I want to see. Which, yeah, that speaks to it. So for me, like I think even if you're getting into podcasting, the idea of being on video scares you, do not feel that you have to do video. Don't let that stop you. Just do audio. You're going to be okay. But if you're like, you know what, I'm already capturing video, like what we're recording in today, Candace, like we have the video, we might as well publish it, right?
Yep.
It's not going to hurt to bring extra exposure. But if you're someone, I've met a number of people like this, like the idea of being on camera freaks me out, then don't do it. You don't need YouTube to make it. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the biggest podcasts on the planet still to this day, they're audio only. They're not on YouTube and they're doing just fine. Now, will that be forever? I don't know. But I'm just saying, like, we don't have to do all things and be everywhere for all people. We can pick what we're comfortable with and that's not overwhelming for us, and we can still do really well.
When I re-picked up podcasting, I edited the video and then converted it to audio so that I would have both. But because as an editor, for me, it's easier to edit video because I can see when you're editing audio only, you have to pay 100% attention to what you're listening to. But when you're editing video, it's a little easier. I know that sounds the opposite of what might be true, but that's the way it works for me. So it was a no-brainer just to upload the videos to YouTube since that's how I edited them.
Right.
So that's when I relaunched, that's what I did. So Video Talk Show, all of those episodes from before 2014 are up on YouTube, and then the new, since 2020, all the episodes of Gratitude Geek are on YouTube too. But you are right. I get more audio downloads than video watches.
Yeah, and same. I can't give the exact number because I don't know it off the top of my head, but I know that I'm being very conservative by saying this, 90% of our consumption is through audio platforms and less than 10% is through YouTube. And we, air quotes here, we do everything right to YouTube standards. So we're not just like being lazy. We're doing everything that YouTube says, hey, if you want to perform the best, do all these things. We do all of that. And you mentioned editing. There's a lot of tools out there now that make it easier than ever. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you're like, ooh, I want to get into podcasting, Candace, it's not what it was even just 5 years ago. Like the comparison like on a difficulty level is night and day. So if you're like, oh man, this sounds like a lot, it is a lot, but it's not as much as it once was. And I'm going to see it continue getting easier and easier for people.
Well, we are recording this episode on Riverside, and I switched over to Riverside about 4 or maybe 5 episodes ago. And there is a learning curve because I've used Zoom I used Zoom for the first 11 years of the show, right?
Right, yeah.
And Zoom is just easy. Not pretty. It's not attractive. Riverside produces a much more attractive video. But it was really easy. So I have this learning curve, and I'm I cuss a lot while I'm editing the videos. But it is a technology that did not exist. I mean, Riverside literally takes all the ums out. I learned that you shouldn't let it do that, though, because it doesn't do it very well.
Right, yeah.
But it just automatically takes out your ums, and then it finds areas of the episode that have fluff. You might want to delete this area. I was like, what? So it does have features that once I learn how to use them, I'm going to appreciate better. Again, I see all these podcasts that are new that, aren't as old as mine that are obviously using some sort of platform like Riverside that is built in with this studio, and you can do all the editing right there. And you can even upload the videos from the studio to wherever you want to upload them. I haven't figured out how to convert it to audio yet. I have to do that manually. I'm sure there's a way.
There is a way, and I think it's one of the download options. But I'm not certain. I'm not actually the best at the tech side of things. But I will say, for people like, okay, I'm thinking about doing this podcasting thing, I'll tell you my three pieces of tools I use. I use Buzzsprout.com as my hosting provider. I use Riverside to do my recordings. I use PodMatch to find my guest and do my research. Those are the three tools that I use. And from a cost standpoint, I don't know if that always changes, so I won't necessarily share that directly, but it's under $50 a month that I'm spending. And I think I have a good show.
Yeah, you do have a good show.
Thank you.
So I just started using Riverside before I used Zoom. I've hosted on Libsyn from the very beginning, and Libsyn is one of the original podcast hosts. The show's been out there for 11 years. They have never failed me.
That's great. They're a good platform.
I'm a huge fan of Libsyn. It isn't as fancy as some of the newer platforms. Some of the newer platforms do a lot more interesting things, but Libsyn is rock solid, right?
Yeah.
I use Headliner app to create audiograms. So if you are a podcast guest and you are on a show and you want to repurpose the show, Headliner is a fantastic app to use to create audiograms, especially if it's an audio only show. So you can create 10 video snippets of your, and the AI does it. So you don't even have to do any thinking. You just let AI do it. And you can download those snippets and you can share them on your socials. Another way that you can clip video, you can repurpose video version of the podcast is a tool called Opus Clip, which takes your video podcast and clips it down into 30-second, 60-second, 5-minute clips. So as a guest, there's a lot of ways for you to repurpose the show too. Now that we've talked about tools, I'm sure there's other tools that we both use.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. These are what you mentioned. These are like some of the main ones I suggest in the space. And the thing is, I always tell people, like, don't try every tool that's out there. Figure out what you want to do, and you don't even need to use all the features of it. Like, I know that Riverside does more than what I use it for. Like, I guarantee it. But what I'm doing works, and I find that people get very fatigued if they're trying 30 different things. Like, pick the tool set that works for you and stick with it until you feel there's a need to actually make a change. But I know some people, they will try every tool and they don't stick with anything because they want to try it all. I'm like, man, well, software is spinning up faster than it ever has because of AI. It's allowing people to spin up projects really fast. So everyone's just trying all these new things and then shutting down the next day. And just don't get into that. Like, keep the main thing. If you're like, I want to be a podcast guest or host, then do that, right? And then pick the one or two things that will help drive the needle forward with that you know that you can do and that are interesting to you, and say no to the rest. I find that's a recipe for winning.
Mm-hmm. And find people to hang out with that elevate your game. Meeting Alex was like really groovy. So Alex, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you're just dying to talk about?
Yeah, it actually kind of goes back to something we hinted at a little bit earlier, but the idea of using podcasting, whether it's being a guest or host, to build connections. There's this notion in podcasting that's more recently come up where hosts are like, I want to charge my guests to be on the platform, and vice versa even. People are like, I want to talk about that. I want to be a guest, but like, hey, I got to charge for my time. And the reality is, like, maybe you can do that on both sides of the microphone, but at the end of the day, it takes connection and turns it into transaction. There's nothing like saying, hey, I don't actually care about you, so pay me $100 so we can just get this over with, right? And so we're like, Alex, it's not really like that. It's to help with this, help with that. Like, maybe that perspective, my mind could be changed on it, but the reality is I'm just like, man, give me an option for donation instead then, like if I'm going to be a guest or something along those lines. But at the end of the day, like, the way that you build connection with people is not through making a transaction. And Kandas, I actually want to highlight an episode of your podcast I think you did a really good job on. It was episode 261 with Michael Morgan, and it was titled The Power of Networking. Came out on March 4th, 2025. I encourage everyone, when you're done with this episode, that's the next thing I would encourage you to do. And something Michael said was that there are people in his network that he's never asked anything of. And he even said, perhaps I never will, but I'm still going to do my part to help. And you best believe if I ask for something, they're probably going to be willing to reciprocate that. And to me, podcasting on both sides of the microphone really is that. Don't delude that by putting a few dollars in front of it, right? Because as soon as you do that, you're telling that person, hey, I'm not going to ask you for anything ever again, and you are not welcome to come back to me and ask me for anything, right? And maybe it sounds a little extreme, but I think if we have the right mindset that this is about collaboration, together we're going to serve listeners and make their lives better than the way they were before they listened to us, man, that's a meaningful experience, and you can build something upon that meaningful experience that I think can turn into so much more than just a quick little $50 here and there type of thing. So I always encourage people, think about the connections you're building when you're in this room that me and Kandas are in right now. Like, there is power behind this, and I guarantee you, we're going to do more together. This is not the end of it. This is actually the beginning of it.
Yeah, the collaboration is the piece that is the most fun. When you find other hosts that you connect with really well, the collaboration opportunities are amazing. Amazing. And also, when you have a show that uplifts people and doesn't ask for anything in return, the opportunities are enormous. So last week, listener, if you listened to episode 265 last week, it was my interview with my absolutely favorite sci-fi author, Joshua Dalzell. I would not have been able to land that interview with a man who has over 100,000 five-star reviews on Amazon for his books, who is talking to movie studios about turning his books into movies. I wouldn't have been able to land that interview if I hadn't have built a community that was filled with gratitude, right? He wouldn't have said yes if I was only transactional. He said yes because he understood that I wanted to have a conversation to help people. And if you are writing a book, that episode is absolutely going to help you be a better fiction author. That's just one little example of how building community first with it instead of transactionally has enhanced my life as a podcast host. So thank you for bringing that up, Alex.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Thank you. Really reinforced the point there. I love that.
All right, Alex, this is your moment of gratitude. For whom or what are you most grateful?
Listen, I feel like everyone says this, I'm sure. There are so many people in my life. And like, for me, mentioning I'm following Jesus, like that's first and foremost, my wife. But I really want to go back to my early days of podcasting. I met Chris Krimitsos. He's a guy who runs PodFest. And he really like immediately took me under his wing. I didn't deserve to speak at PodFest, which is a big podcasting conference in Orlando. I hadn't really earned the right to or anything like that, but he reached out to me personally and said, "Hey, I really like you. Let me see if I can help." And since day one, that guy has just helped me every step of the way, including with PodMatch, everything along the way. And he's someone in my work that I have just come to really love and appreciate. Like our friendship goes far beyond that. We're actually spending a weekend together with our families and stuff like that in just a couple of weeks here. But I'm really just thankful for that individual saying, "Hey, Alex, I see something in you that I don't even know if you see in yourself yet. Let me help along the way with that." And so Chris Krimitsos is someone that I'm just so grateful for as a friend and as a podcaster.
Thanks for tuning in to Gratitude Geek, the podcast for grateful micropreneurs building genuine, lasting connections with clients, colleagues, and community. Our theme music is by Rev Brock and Soul Lily. To connect with Alex Sanfilippo and check out the resources we've discussed today, we've discussed some resources. There's a whole long list of them. Be sure to go to the show notes at gratitudegeek.com. This is episode 266. I've been your host, Kandas Rodarte. Stay groovy, my friends.
Stay groovy, my friends. Thanks for being here.